There's a profound distinction between foreseeing an empire's downfall and truly grasping the nature of its collapse. Many envision imperial disintegration as a protracted, gradual erosion spanning decades, a slow descent into insignificance. That, however, is not the reality. When empires falter, their demise is swift, often brutal, and for those experiencing it, entirely unexpected until it's far too late. In the year 410, Rome stood as the eternal city, an unconquered bastion for 8 centuries. Merely 3 days later, it was engulfed in flames. The Visigoths plundered its sacred sites, while citizens desperately fled, carrying what little they could salvage. The dominion that had shaped the world for half a millennium was dissolving before their eyes, a reality the Romans found utterly unbelievable. In June of 1940, France was celebrating its preeminence. Possessing the most formidable military on the continent and fortified by the supposedly impregnable Maginot Line, optimism prevailed. Yet by the close of that same month, German tanks were already parading through Paris. The government had abandoned the capital, and France capitulated. In a mere 4 weeks, a global superpower was reduced to a subservient state. By December of 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev still held the presidency of the Soviet Union, a superpower armed with 30,000 nuclear weapons. However, by December 26th, the Soviet Union had ceased to exist. It took just 900 days from the fall of the Berlin Wall to its complete dissolution. No one anticipated such a rapid unraveling. 3 empires, 3 collapses, each unfolding with increasing velocity. And here's what should truly alarm you. Collapse doesn't adhere to our expectations. It arrives suddenly, violently, and by the time individuals comprehend its onset, it has already reached its conclusion. This narrative illuminates the true face of imperial collapse, not the drawn-out decline, but the final, cataclysmic event, the precise moment when reputation shatters and stark reality takes hold. It details the 6 distinct phases of an empire's end, and explains why every present indicator suggests that America is hurtling towards this precipice with alarming speed, far quicker than anyone cares to admit. Before we dissect the visual of collapse itself, it's crucial to comprehend the underlying reasons for its astonishing rapidity. Why do seemingly stable empires disintegrate in mere months or even days? The answer lies in leverage and collective belief. Empires are not sustained solely by material resources. Their foundation rests upon confidence. Confidence in the value of their currency, confidence in the protective capacity of their military, confidence in the government's ability to maintain order, and the unwavering belief that tomorrow will mirror today. This confidence, however, is inherently precarious. When it erodes, the entire edifice crumbles simultaneously. Imagine it akin to a dam. For years, hairline fractures may appear, and water might seep through. Engineers might identify these issues, assuring that they are manageable, and the dam, for the time being, holds. Those dwelling downstream continue their lives, observing the dam daily, accepting its permanent presence. Then, one fateful day, a fissure widens, water pressure intensifies, and suddenly the entire structure fails. It's not a gradual breach, it's a cataclysmic surge. Those below have mere minutes, not hours. This is the essence of imperial collapse. The empire is the dam. The immense pressure stems from accumulated debt, overextended military commitments, currency devaluation, and societal decay. The cracks have been forming for a considerable period, but the dam endures until it inevitably gives way. And when it does, the collapse is total and instantaneous. Let us examine how this unfolds in practice, not the protracted periods of decline, but the swift, decisive collapse itself, the point at which perceived stability vanishes. We will observe 3 empires at their moments of greatest vulnerability: Rome in 410, France in 1940, and the Soviet Union in 1991. We will focus solely on the collapse phase, the final, critical days. For understanding the nature of an ending is the only effective means of recognizing it when it confronts you directly. Rome, 410 AD. By the latter half of the 4th century, Rome was undeniably in decline. This was common knowledge. Barbarian incursions along the frontiers were frequent. The military strength had waned, and the currency had been significantly debased. Nevertheless, Rome remained Rome. Its capital had never been breached in 800 years. Romans fervently believed in the city's eternal nature, divinely protected and utterly invincible. In 408 AD, Alaric, the Visigoth leader, and his formidable army laid siege to Rome. His demands were explicit: vast quantities of gold, silver, and essential provisions. Rome complied. Alaric withdrew. The immediate crisis was averted, the city apparently saved. In 409, Alaric returned, his demands escalating. Again, Rome capitulated, satisfying his requisitions. Another crisis narrowly avoided. However, Rome's coffers were becoming alarmingly depleted, sustained appeasement was no longer feasible, and Alaric was keenly aware of this impending insolvency. On August 24, 410 AD, Alaric's forces entered Rome, not through direct conquest but by exploiting internal betrayal. Slaves within the city opened the gates, admitting the Visigoths. For 3 agonizing days they engaged in widespread looting. Temples were stripped bare of their precious adornments. Wealthy citizens were either held for ransom or brutally slain, and ordinary inhabitants desperately fled, clutching whatever possessions they could manage. The city, which had endured for 8 centuries, was ablaze. When Alaric departed, Rome was left a hollow shell. This sacking of Rome was not a conventional military defeat. The Roman legions were conspicuously absent, engaged elsewhere in the vast empire, combating other pressing threats. The city fell because Rome could no longer afford to pay its own defenders, nor could it placate the encroaching barbarians. The very infrastructure of its maintenance had collapsed. Once the myth of invincibility was shattered, the empire's demise followed suit. No one truly anticipated such an eventuality, right up until the moment it transpired. The collapse itself spanned 3 days, but the ensuing shockwave resonated for generations. For once Rome fell, every other territory within the empire understood. If their capital could be conquered, then no place was truly secure. Within 66 years, the Western Roman Empire had effectively vanished. Consider the lived experience of those enduring this period. If you were a Roman citizen in 410, your world was unraveling in real time. Your currency had become worthless. The denarius you had diligently saved was now debased to near nothingness. Your property held no value. Who would acquire real estate in a city engulfed in flames? Your social standing offered no protection. Aristocrats were either ransomed or met a violent end. Your government proved utterly incapable of safeguarding you. The legions were no longer present. You were left with 3 grim options: remain and hope for survival, flee and become a refugee, or collaborate with the Visigoths in the desperate hope of clemency. That, in essence, is what collapse looks like. Not a gradual decline, but a sudden descent into chaos, where every pillar of trust crumbles simultaneously. France, 1940. By 1939, the impending war was palpable. Germany was rearming, and Hitler's aggression was undeniable. Yet France remained confident. Bolstered by the formidable Maginot Line, the most powerful army in Europe, and a crucial alliance with Britain, they had, after all, triumphed over Germany in the First World War, and felt assured of a repeat victory. On May 10, 1940, Germany launched its invasion, not by breaching the Maginot Line, but by sweeping through Belgium and the Ardennes forest. The French High Command had erroneously concluded that tanks could not traverse such terrain. Within a single week, German panzer divisions had shattered French defenses. The British Expeditionary Force found itself trapped at Dunkirk. By June 10th, the French government had already fled Paris. On June 14th, German troops entered the capital unopposed. By June 22nd, France had officially surrendered. 6 weeks elapsed between the invasion and France's capitulation. 6 weeks. The continent's preeminent military force did not merely lose, it disintegrated. French soldiers abandoned their posts, officers fled, and entire divisions surrendered without engaging the enemy. The government, which had presided over a vast empire, devolved into a puppet regime based in Vichy. French citizens witnessed their world implode in real time. Observe the ground-level reality. If you were a French citizen in June 1940, everything collapsed in concert. The military was incapable of providing defense. The government absconded, leaving its populace abandoned. Millions of refugees clogged the roadways, fleeing southward with no clear destination. German soldiers occupied Paris. Your savings became worthless. The French economy now fell under German control. Your property was subject to confiscation. Your personal freedoms were utterly extinguished. France, a global superpower, was transformed into occupied territory in a mere 6 weeks. The French populace struggled to comprehend this drastic reversal. They had believed their nation was invincible, right up until the point it unequivocally was not. The psychological impact was devastating, for when an empire falters, it is not merely the government that collapses, but the entire worldview of its inhabitants. Every conviction regarding their nation's strength, their personal security, and their future was obliterated, and this disintegration occurred with such breathtaking speed that adaptation was virtually impossible. Soviet Union, 1991. By 1989, the Soviet Union's precarious situation was widely acknowledged. Its economy was faltering, and Eastern Europe was increasingly restive. Nonetheless, the USSR retained its status as a superpower, possessing a vast nuclear arsenal, a colossal military, and a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. It had served as one of the world's two dominant superpowers for 45 years. Consequently, most people assumed its longevity was assured, that it would endure indefinitely. Even as mounting problems became evident, no one truly anticipated a complete systemic collapse. On November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, signaling the disintegration of East Germany. The Soviet government refrained from intervention, largely due to a lack of resources. Over the ensuing year, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Romania all declared their independence from Soviet influence. The Soviet Empire was demonstrably fragmenting. However, the core Soviet Union persisted. The Union comprised Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the Central Asian republics, and the prevailing assumption was that these constituent parts would remain unified. They had to, but they did not. In August of 1991, hardline communist elements attempted a coup, aiming to reassert centralized Soviet authority. The coup failed, not due to military resistance, but because ordinary soldiers refused to fire upon civilians. The very military that had been instrumental in maintaining the Soviet Union's integrity no longer heeded directives. Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Republic, emerged as the de facto leader, while Gorbachev, the titular president of the Soviet Union, found himself marginalized. By December of 1991, the constituent Soviet republics were seceding one by one. Ukraine declared its sovereignty, followed by Belarus and Kazakhstan. By December 25th, Gorbachev tendered his resignation. The following day, December 26, 1991, marked the official dissolution of the Soviet Union. In 900 days, from the fall of the Berlin Wall to its ultimate disintegration, a superpower possessing 30,000 nuclear warheads vanished. Its demise was not precipitated by external warfare, but by economic collapse, a profound loss of public confidence, and the stark realization that the system was no longer functional. Consider the experience of Soviet citizens during this period. Their nation ceased to exist. The government they had lived under for 70 years disappeared. Their currency, the ruble, became virtually worthless, triggering immediate hyperinflation. Savings evaporated, and pensions became meaningless. The intricate system that had guaranteed employment, housing, and sustenance crumbled. Factories shuttered. Unemployment surged, and crime rates escalated as the state proved incapable of adequately compensating its police force. The military, too, faced severe financial distress, leading some soldiers to sell their weapons for survival. Certain regions devolved into rule by local strongmen or warlords. If you were a Soviet citizen in 1991, your world effectively ended, and this occurred in under 3 years. From superpower status to a failed state, that was the speed of the transition. 3 distinct collapses: Rome, France, the Soviet Union. Each entity believed itself immune to such a fate. Each was demonstrably wrong. Furthermore, each collapse followed an eerily similar sequence. Allow me to outline the 6 discernible phases, for once you grasp this pattern, you will be able to identify it as it unfolds. And indeed, it is beginning to unfold now. Phase 1. The denial. An empire is clearly in a state of decline. Its debt burden is immense, its military overextended, its currency being devalued, and societal problems are proliferating. Yet the government, the media, and the established elite adamantly insist that everything is perfectly fine. They declare that such challenges have been overcome before, that recovery is inevitable, and that these are merely temporary setbacks. They assert their nation's continued status as the preeminent global power. Citizens eager to believe often ignore the glaring warning signs. They place their trust in the existing system, as the alternative, the collapse of their empire, is a prospect too terrifying to contemplate. Rome experienced this phase of denial from roughly 350 AD to 410 AD, a period of 60 years of observable decline, during which pronouncements of manageability were constant. France endured its denial from 1919 to 1940, a span of 20 years spent clinging to the illusion of superpower status. The Soviet Union persisted in its denial from approximately 1970 to 1989, a 19-year period characterized by insistent declarations of communism's ultimate triumph. The denial phase persists until reality forcefully asserts itself, and when that occurs, the acceleration of the collapse becomes virtually unstoppable. Phase 2. The credibility break. This signifies the moment when an empire's reputation is irrevocably destroyed. It might manifest as a military defeat that defies all logical expectation, an economic crisis that exposes the currency's inherent worthlessness, or a political event that starkly illustrates the government's complete loss of control. For Rome, this critical juncture arrived with the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD. The seemingly invincible Roman legions were annihilated, and the emperor himself perished. Rome's military prestige was shattered. For France, it was the fall of Paris in 1940. The continent's strongest army imploded in just 6 weeks. For the Soviet Union, the defining moment was the protracted war in Afghanistan. 10 years of conflict resulted in a defeat, with the vaunted Red Army being overcome by poorly armed villagers. The credibility break represents the precise instant when allies, adversaries, and the populace alike recognized the empire's hollowness, that its formidable reputation was merely a veneer obscuring deep-seated decay. Once credibility is lost, it becomes an insurmountable challenge to regain. Phase 3. The cascade. Following the credibility break, a rapid, synchronized failure of multiple systems ensues. Allies begin to distance themselves, forging new agreements with rivals and losing faith in existing guarantees. Adversaries seize the opportunity, acting with impunity, probing the empire's boundaries only to discover a lack of meaningful consequences. The currency experiences rapid devaluation, and inflation escalates dramatically. Foreign investors divest their holdings, and the domestic population loses all confidence. The government's ability to control the public narrative evaporates. Social cohesion disintegrates, leading to widespread protests, riots, and a surge in criminal activity. Individuals realize their government can no longer provide protection. This phase is profoundly disquieting due to its non-linear nature. The collapse accelerates at an exponential rate. Rome's cascade unfolded between 410 and 476 AD, a period of 66 years of systematic disintegration. France experienced its cascade in June 1940, a mere 4 weeks from invasion to surrender. The Soviet Union's cascade occurred between 1989 and 1991, a span of 900 days from the fall of the Berlin Wall to its ultimate dissolution. Each collapsed progressively faster than the last, influenced by the accelerated flow of information and the interconnectedness of modern systems. Crucially, once confidence evaporates, there is insufficient time for recovery. Phase 4. Fragmentation. The empire begins to splinter. Various regions declare their independence, provinces cease remitting tax revenues, and military units either disobey orders or defect. The central government loses its grip on power. For Rome, its provinces transformed into independent kingdoms: Gaul, Spain, Britain, North Africa, all breaking away. The Roman Empire effectively shrank to encompass only Italy, and even that territory eventually succumbed. For France, the fragmentation of its empire was immediate. Colonies in Africa and Asia initiated independence movements, which the French government was powerless to quell. For the Soviet Union, its constituent republics departed en masse. Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, Central Asia, all asserted their sovereignty. The Soviet Union contracted from 15 republics to none in a matter of months. Fragmentation becomes an inevitable outcome as the empire lacks the resources to maintain its territorial integrity. The military cannot be adequately compensated, the bureaucratic machinery falters, and individual regions perceive greater benefit in forging their own destinies. Phase 5. Freefall. This represents the most precarious and desolate phase. The currency experiences a complete collapse, leading to either hyperinflation or severe deflation, rendering money virtually worthless. The economy grinds to a halt, supply chains fracture, and essential resources like food and energy become scarce and unreliable. The government forfeits its legitimacy, and citizens cease adhering to laws. Crime rates skyrocket, and regional strongmen or militias assume control. The state is rendered incapable of maintaining any semblance of order. For Rome, this period spanned from roughly 450 to 476 AD. characterized by widespread starvation, relentless barbarian raids, and the absence of a functional government. For France, this phase extended from 1940 to 1944, marked by occupation, collaboration, internal resistance, and widespread chaos. For the Soviet Union, this era encompassed 1991 to 1998, a period of hyperinflation, economic devastation, the rise of organized crime syndicates, and the emergence of regional warlords. The free-fall phase inflicts the most severe suffering upon ordinary citizens, as the fundamental systems they relied upon, currency, law, and supply chains, cease to function, compelling them to survive in the precarious environment of a collapsed state. Phase 6. The Reset. Eventually, a new order begins to emerge. This can take various forms: the establishment of a new government, foreign occupation, or the complete fragmentation into numerous smaller states. Regardless of the specifics, the old empire is definitively gone. Whatever succeeds, it represents a fundamentally different reality. For Rome, the reset manifested in the emergence of the medieval kingdoms that gradually supplanted the empire. For France, the reset involved liberation by the Allied forces and its subsequent position as a secondary global power. For the Soviet Union, the reset resulted in the formation of Russia and 14 independent republics. The reset is not a regression to the previous system. It signifies a complete shift to a new paradigm, and the individuals who once inhabited the empire must adapt to a world where their former nation no longer exists. These are the 6 phases: denial, credibility, break, cascade, fragmentation, freefall, and reset. Every empire that succumbs to collapse navigates through these stages, and currently the United States is entering Phase 2. Allow me to illustrate our present position. Phase 1, denial, has effectively concluded. We have been mired in denial for 2 decades, encompassing the financial crisis of 2008, the protracted wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the unprecedented monetary expansion during the COVID-19 pandemic, our staggering national debt, and pervasive political dysfunction. Despite these mounting challenges, the government, media, and elite circles have consistently maintained that all is well, proclaiming America's continued economic and military supremacy and the unwavering stability of the dollar. They urged trust in the system. This period of denial is now undeniably drawing to a close, as far too many individuals are now observing the palpable cracks forming in the foundation. Phase 2, the credibility break, has commenced. The withdrawal from Afghanistan in August of 2021 served as a stark credibility break. After 20 years, $2 trillion invested, and the deployment of the world's most advanced military, the outcome was a definitive defeat. The Taliban seized control within 11 days. Our Afghan allies were left abandoned. The scenes at Kabul airport were a picture of utter chaos, with desperate Afghans falling from departing aircraft, and 13 American service members tragically lost their lives. The entire withdrawal operation was a catastrophic failure. The world watched, including China, Russia, and Iran, and they perceived profound weakness. This constitutes a significant credibility break, the moment when an empire's reputation crumbles and its underlying vulnerabilities are exposed. However, this is not the sole credibility break unfolding. The dollar is steadily losing its status as the primary global reserve currency. In 2000, 73% of global reserves were held in dollars. Today, that figure has fallen to 58% and continues to decline. Nations within the BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are actively developing alternative payment systems. China and Russia are increasingly conducting trade in their respective currencies, the yuan and the ruble, rather than dollars. Saudi Arabia has recently agreed to accept yuan for oil transactions. These developments represent a significant credibility break for the dollar. In the military sphere, the United States is failing to meet its recruitment targets by a substantial margin of 25%, forcing a lowering of standards and a decline in overall readiness. The Navy currently operates 290 ships, while China possesses over 350. The Air Force is grappling with its oldest fleet in history, with aging equipment and modernization efforts lagging significantly behind schedule. This constitutes a credibility break for the U.S. military. Public trust in American institutions has plummeted to unprecedented lows. Congress currently holds an approval rating of a mere 20%. The Supreme Court is widely perceived as increasingly partisan. The mainstream media is viewed with profound distrust. Elections are frequently contested. These factors collectively represent a credibility break for the American system of governance. We are therefore at the very inception of Phase 2. And if history serves as any guide, Phase 3, the cascade, will inevitably follow, and it will arrive with alarming speed. Allow me to illustrate what this cascade might entail for the United States, because once it begins, its acceleration will be exponential. By the time individuals recognize its onset, it will be far too late to halt its momentum. The cascade will be initiated by a triggering event. This could manifest as a currency crisis, a decisive military defeat, a default on national debt, or a profound political upheaval. Whatever the specific trigger, it will expose the inherent fragility of our interconnected systems. And once exposed, confidence will evaporate. Consider one potential scenario: China's assertive move on Taiwan. The United States has publicly committed to defending Taiwan, and our entire strategic posture in Asia hinges upon this commitment. However, numerous wargame simulations indicate a probable U.S. defeat, not necessarily due to China's superior military might, but because we would be unable to rapidly deploy sufficient forces. Furthermore, China's advanced hypersonic missiles pose a significant threat to our aircraft carriers, against which we possess limited defensive capabilities. Our supply lines, stretching across vast distances, are also exceedingly vulnerable. Should China invade Taiwan and the United States prove incapable of preventing it, this would represent a devastating credibility break, thereby triggering the cascade. Our allies in Asia, such as Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, would conclude that American security guarantees are no longer reliable, prompting them to forge closer ties with China. Our dominance in the Pacific would dissolve, and our technological edge, heavily reliant on Taiwanese semiconductor production, would be compromised. The dollar, historically underpinned by American military power, would rapidly lose its reserve currency status as foreign holders divest their holdings en masse. This would trigger runaway inflation, decimating savings and purchasing power. Alternatively, consider a debt crisis scenario. The United States currently carries a national debt exceeding $36 trillion, with annual interest payments alone approaching $1 trillion, a sum greater than our defense budget. And this debt continues to escalate relentlessly. At some critical juncture, the bond markets will lose their confidence in our ability to repay. They will demand substantially higher interest rates for lending to the U.S. government. Interest rates would spike, forcing the government into an impossible choice: default on its debt, print vast sums of money to meet its obligations and trigger hyperinflation, or implement draconian spending cuts that would precipitate an economic collapse. Each of these outcomes is catastrophic. A U.S. default would immediately strip the dollar of its reserve currency status. Printing money would lead to hyperinflation, obliterating savings and eroding purchasing power. Implementing severe spending cuts would result in widespread economic contraction and a surge in unemployment. Any of these scenarios would serve as the catalyst for the cascade. Consider a third possibility, one of political upheaval. Imagine the 2024 election results are disputed, with both factions declaring victory. Neither side concedes, and several states refuse to officially validate the outcome. The Supreme Court finds itself in a stalemate. Peaceful demonstrations escalate into violent unrest, compelling the military's involvement. Some units comply with orders, while others refuse. The government structure begins to disintegrate. When the established authority can no longer maintain public order, a chain reaction is triggered. Regions start disregarding directives from the central government. Individual states begin forging their own international trade agreements. The US dollar rapidly loses its value as confidence in the government that guarantees it erodes. The nation effectively dissolves in real time. My intention is not to predict which specific scenario will unfold, but rather to demonstrate that numerous pathways can lead to this cascade. Once initiated, it invariably follows the historical pattern observed in every preceding empire. Allies distance themselves, adversaries act without apprehension, the national currency plummets, and societal order disintegrates, culminating in the fragmentation of the empire. How swiftly does this process occur? The Roman Empire's decline took 66 years. The French Empire's collapse transpired in 4 weeks. The dissolution of the Soviet Union spanned 900 days. For the United States, this process will be significantly faster than that of the Soviet Union. This acceleration is due to the instantaneous nature of modern communication, the interconnectedness of global financial markets, and the absence of time for adaptation once public trust falters. I estimate that the cascade, from its inception to complete fragmentation, will take between 18 and 36 months. This is the window of time available from the moment the trigger event occurs until the United States, as we currently understand it, ceases to exist. Allow me to illustrate what this disintegration will look like on the ground, what an individual might experience during the American collapse. Initially, a monetary crisis will grip the nation. The dollar's value will plummet dramatically. Inflation rates, initially at 5%, will surge to 20%, then 50%, and eventually reach triple digits. Your accumulated savings could lose half their value within a single year. Prices will double every few months. Gasoline prices could skyrocket from $4 per gallon to $20. Groceries that once cost $100 might suddenly cost $500. Your wages, assuming you still have employment, will be unable to keep pace. You will find yourself progressively poorer each month, with no apparent recourse. Imported goods will become prohibitively expensive. Electronics, medications, and any items sourced from abroad will transform into luxury commodities. Supply chains will fracture, leading to empty shelves in retail stores. Shortages will become commonplace. You will be unable to find essential items not due to their non-existence, but because the logistical infrastructure supporting their distribution will have collapsed. Secondly, societal order will break down. The government will be unable to fund law enforcement agencies, leading to an explosion in crime. Petty theft, armed robbery, carjacking, and home invasions will become rampant. Your home will no longer be a sanctuary. The affluent will resort to private security measures, leaving the general populace to fend for themselves. Protests and riots will become frequent occurrences, fueled by widespread anger, fear, and desperation. Cities will transform into perilous environments. Some individuals will seek refuge in rural areas, while others will fortify their residences. Faith in established institutions will evaporate entirely. Government pronouncements will be met with disbelief, and past legislation will be disregarded. The fundamental social contract will be irrevocably broken. Third, regional fragmentation will ensue. States will begin to defy federal authority. California might independently establish trade agreements with China, while Texas could explore secession. Regions will realize their diminished reliance on Washington, and Washington's capacity to enforce its will be non-existent due to the federal government's insolvency. Military installations will close, and troops will be recalled as funding for their maintenance dries up. The global empire will contract to its core territories, and even these will begin to fracture. Fourth, a complete economic collapse will occur. Unemployment rates will soar, businesses will shutter, and financial institutions will fail. Your retirement savings, such as your 401k, will become worthless, and pensions will vanish. The real estate market will plummet as home ownership becomes unattainable. The stock market will crash. Anyone holding their wealth in dollars will see it wiped out. The only individuals who might weather this storm are those who possessed assets with intrinsic value, such as real estate, commodities, foreign currencies, or gold. However, the majority of Americans have their financial resources tied up in dollars, and their fortunes will be obliterated when the currency collapses. Fifth, a survival phase will commence. Concerns will shift from political discourse or policy debates to the fundamental necessities of food, water, and personal safety. The critical questions will revolve around your ability to protect your family, the sufficiency of your supplies, and the strength of your community support networks, as the systems you once relied upon will no longer function. You will be left to your own devices. This is the nature of collapse, not a gradual decline, but a swift, violent, and chaotic disintegration, and it will unfold at a speed that defies comprehension. Now the crucial question arises: can this trajectory be altered? Can the United States avert this cascade? Technically, yes. Practically, no. To prevent such a cascade, the U.S. would need to undertake actions that no declining empire has ever historically accomplished. We would first need to acknowledge the problem, to accept that we are in decline, that our global influence is waning, and that our current imperial structure is unsustainable. No empire has ever willingly admitted to decline, as doing so hastens the loss of power. Allies would immediately recalibrate their positions, and adversaries would seize the opportunity to advance their agendas. Admitting weakness is tantamount to self-destruction for an empire. Furthermore, we would require a drastic reduction in military expenditure, necessitating the closure of bases and the cessation of global commitments, effectively withdrawing from imperial overreach. However, such a withdrawal would be perceived as defeat, and no superpower willingly embraces the appearance of weakness. We would also need to address our national debt, which would demand either severe spending cuts or substantial tax increases, both of which are politically unfeasible. Slashing expenditures would cripple the economy, while raising taxes would trigger a massive outflow of capital. There is no easy solution. Rebuilding our manufacturing sector and reshoring supply chains to restore productive capacity would require decades, a luxury we do not possess. We would also need to foster social cohesion, rectify political dysfunction, and re-establish faith in our institutions. However, the path to achieving these goals is unclear, given the profound divisions within the country. Therefore, from a practical standpoint, we are incapable of halting the cascade, as doing so necessitates confronting reality and making difficult choices that no one is prepared to embrace. By the time the crisis compels these decisions, it will be too late. The cascade will already be in full swing. It is imperative to understand that this discussion transcends partisan politics. It is not about the left or the right, Republicans or Democrats. This is a matter of simple arithmetic. Empires that persistently overspend inevitably collapse. Empires that devalue their currency face the same fate. Empires that overextend their military power are destined for ruin. The United States has engaged in all three of these practices. The pattern is firmly established. The only variable is the timing. And when it arrives, it will do so with unprecedented speed. It will be faster than Rome's fall, faster than France's collapse, and faster than the Soviet Union's dissolution. This accelerated timeline is attributable to the fragility of modern systems, the rapid movements of global markets, and the potential for public confidence to evaporate within hours rather than years. You are living through the final chapter of the American empire. Most individuals remain unaware of this reality, believing that current circumstances are temporary, that recovery is inevitable, and that America is an eternal entity. However, empires are not immortal. All eventually meet their end. The United States is concluding its imperial era now. The indicators are palpable, credibility is eroding, and the cascade has commenced. Within the next 10 years, the United States as you know it will cease to exist. This will not be due to external conflict or invasion, but rather to economic implosion. We have followed the identical path of every preceding failed empire, and the underlying economic realities have caught up with us. If this perspective has altered your understanding of impending events, please subscribe. When the cascade intensifies and the collapse becomes undeniable, you will need clarity on what is happening and why. The historical record provides a clear pattern. This phenomenon has occurred 3 times before, and it is unfolding again. The sole question is whether you will foresee it, or like the Romans in 409 AD, the French in May of 1940, or the Soviets in 1988, you will believe everything is stable right up until the moment it demonstrably is not. History holds the answers, and those answers indicate that the cascade has already begun.